In a quiet suburban town nestled between rolling hills and lush greenery, the Johnson family lived an unassuming life. The triplets, Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm, were the heart of their household. Born just minutes apart, the boys shared everything: their birthdays, their dreams, and even their mischievous grins. To their neighbors, they were ordinary teenagers who spent their days playing basketball at the park, cracking jokes in the school cafeteria, and helping out around the community. But what no one outside their immediate family knew was that these three brothers were far from ordinary. James Johnson, the boys' father, had served as a Navy SEAL for over 2 decades before retiring to raise his family. A man of few words, but immense discipline, James instilled in his sons not only values like respect, integrity, and courage, but also skills that most kids their age could never imagine mastering. From the time they could walk, Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm were taught how to defend themselves, think critically under pressure, and work together as a team. Their backyard became a training ground where push-ups turned into tactical drills. Tree climbing morphed into stealth exercises, and water balloons simulated emergency scenarios. Though it seemed like playtime to outsiders, every activity had a purpose. Lisa Johnson, their mother, often teased James about turning their home into a boot camp. But deep down, she understood why he did it. Growing up black in America meant facing challenges others might never comprehend. James wanted his sons to be prepared for anything life threw at them, whether it was bullying at school or something far more dangerous. He never told them outright that they were being trained to handle extreme situations. Instead, he framed it as lessons in self-reliance and brotherhood. And so, the triplets grew up believing they were simply learning how to protect each other, and maybe have a little fun along the way. Despite their rigorous upbringing, the boys thrived academically and socially. Marcus was the strategist, always thinking 5 steps ahead. His teachers praised him for his leadership skills, though they didn't realize those qualities came from late-night sessions planning mock missions with his dad. Michael, the athlete of the group, excelled in sports, using his agility and strength to dominate on the field. What people didn't know was that his reflexes weren't just honed through football practice. They were sharpened during sparring matches in the garage. Malcolm, the quietest of the trio, had a knack for observation. He noticed things others missed, a skill he'd developed while practicing surveillance techniques in the woods behind their house. Life in their neighborhood was peaceful, or at least it appeared that way. The Johnsons were well liked by their neighbors, who admired their strong family bond and commitment to giving back to the community. On weekends, the triplets helped organize food drives and cleanup events, earning praise for their kindness and initiative. Yet, beneath the surface of this idyllic existence lay a darker truth. Racism still lingered in subtle and overt ways, manifesting in sideways glances, whispered comments, and occasional acts of hostility. The boys learned early on to brush off such incidents, focusing instead on proving their worth through hard work and positivity. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, the triplets headed to their favorite spot, the local park. The basketball court there was their sanctuary, a place where they could laugh, compete, and forget about the world's complexities for a while. As they played, sweat glistening on their foreheads and sneakers squeaking against the pavement, they felt invincible. They were just 3 brothers enjoying a game, unaware that danger lurked nearby. Across the street, parked under the shade of a large oak tree, sat a white van. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. 2 men with shaved heads leaned casually against the vehicle, their eyes fixed intently on the boys. At first glance, they looked harmless enough, just another pair of strangers passing through town. But something about their demeanor set off alarm bells in Malcolm's mind. He paused mid-dribble, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied them. "You notice those guys?" he asked his brothers quietly, nodding toward the van. Marcus glanced over, his brow furrowing. "Yeah, I saw them earlier too," he replied, keeping his voice low. "They've been sitting there for a while." Michael shrugged, dribbling the ball between his legs. "Maybe they're lost or waiting for someone. Doesn't mean anything." Malcolm wasn't convinced. "Still, we should keep an eye on them," he said firmly. "Better safe than sorry." The brothers exchanged a brief look, silently agreeing to stay alert. Over the years, they'd learned to trust their instincts, a lesson drilled into them by their father. Still, they tried not to let their guard show. They resumed their game, laughing and trash-talking as usual, but their movements carried an edge of caution now. Every time the ball bounced, they subtly checked the van. Every time footsteps echoed nearby, they tensed slightly, ready to act if needed. As the minutes ticked by, the tension eased somewhat. The van remained stationary, its occupants seemingly content to watch from afar. Perhaps Malcolm had been overthinking things. After all, they'd encountered suspicious stares before. It came with the territory of being young black men in a predominantly white neighborhood. Shaking off his unease, Malcolm focused on sinking a three-pointer, the satisfying swish of the net momentarily lifting his spirits. But fate has a way of testing even the best-laid plans. Just as dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the court, the van's engine roared to life. It pulled away from the curb, disappearing, around the corner. For a moment, the triplets allowed themselves to relax, assuming the threat, if there ever was one, had passed. Little did they know, their lives were about to change forever. Unbeknownst to them, the men in the van were part of a racist gang notorious for targeting minority families. These weren't random observers. They were predators, sizing up their prey, and the Johnson triplets, with their athletic builds and confident demeanor, had unknowingly caught their attention. The gang members drove off not because they'd lost interest, but because they were formulating a plan. A sinister scheme that would put the boys' training, bond, and resilience to the ultimate test. As the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, the triplets gathered their belongings and started walking home. The air was warm, filled with the hum of cicadas and the faint scent of freshly cut grass. They joked about the game, teased each other about missed shots, and debated which movie to watch later. Their laughter echoed through the empty streets, masking the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. For now, they remained blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike when they least expected it. The walk home from the park was usually a routine affair for Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm. They'd often joke around, recounting highlights from their basketball game or teasing each other about who had missed the easiest shot. But tonight felt different. The earlier encounter with the white van lingered in the back of their minds, even if they tried to brush it off as paranoia. Malcolm kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the quiet streets for any sign of trouble. Marcus maintained a steady pace, his eyes darting between parked cars and dark alleys. Michael, ever the optimist, attempted to lighten the mood by recounting an embarrassing story from gym class, but his laughter sounded forced. As they turned onto their street, the familiar sight of their house should have brought comfort. Instead, unease settled deeper into their bones. That's when they heard it. The unmistakable rumble of an engine approaching fast. Before they could react, headlights blinded them, and the same white van screeched to a halt mere feet away. 4 men jumped out, their faces obscured by masks. One carried a crowbar, another held a pistol, and all wore expressions of cold determination. Their voices were loud and menacing, laced with racial slurs that cut through the night like knives. "Get on the ground," one of them barked, waving the gun wildly. "Now." The triplets froze, adrenaline surging through their veins. This wasn't just some random act of aggression. It was calculated, deliberate. These men weren't here to rob them. They were targeting them specifically because of the color of their skin. For a split second, panic threatened to take over. But then something remarkable happened. Years of training kicked in almost instinctively. Without exchanging a word, the brothers locked eyes, communicating silently. Each of them knew what needed to be done. Marcus stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between his brothers and the armed men. His voice was calm but firm. "We don't want any trouble," he said, raising his hand slowly. "What do you want?" the leader sneered, stepping closer. "Shut up. You think you can walk around here like you own the place? We'll teach you a lesson." Michael clenched, his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to charge at the man and knock him flat. But he remembered his father's words. Control your emotions. Act only when the time is right. So instead, he stood still, mimicking Marcus's posture while subtly shifting, his weight onto the balls of his feet, ready to move at a moment's notice. Malcolm, meanwhile, scanned the scene with sharp precision. He noted every detail, the way the men fanned out, leaving gaps in their formation, the crowbar resting loosely in one man's grip, the faint tremor in the gunman's hand betraying his nervousness. Most importantly, he spotted a weak point, a narrow gap between two of the attackers where they could potentially make a break for it if necessary, but escape wasn't an option yet. Not until they understood the full scope of the situation, so they played along, for now. When one of the men lunged forward to grab Michael, Marcus intercepted, using his body as a shield. The distraction gave Malcolm enough time to whisper a plan to his brothers. "On my signal," he murmured under his breath, so softly only they could hear. "Stay low and go left." The kidnappers didn't give them much time to strategize. With brutal efficiency, they shoved the boys into the back of the van, binding their wrists with zip ties. The interior smelled of oil and sweat, and the floor vibrated with the roar of the engine as the vehicle sped away. Fear clawed at their chests, but they refused to let it consume them. Instead, they focused on survival. Inside the cramped space, the brothers huddled together, drawing strength from each other's presence. Marcus leaned close, his voice barely audible above the noise. "Remember what Dad taught us," he whispered. "Stay calm. Look for opportunities." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "They messed with the wrong people," he muttered, his tone fierce despite the circumstances. Malcolm remained silent, his mind racing. He replayed every drill, every simulation their father had put them through. Escape scenarios, combat techniques, psychological tactics, all of it flooded back to him in vivid detail. These men might have weapons and numbers on their side, but they underestimated who they were dealing with, and that mistake would cost them dearly. After what felt like an eternity, the van finally came to a stop. The doors swung open, and the triplets were yanked out roughly, their legs stumbling over uneven terrain. They found themselves in a remote wooded area, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. Ahead loomed a dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in peeling paint. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and the chill in the air did little to ease their growing dread. Their captors herded them inside, shoving them down a flight of creaky stairs into a dimly lit basement. The room was damp and musty, filled with rusted tools, stacks of old crates and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The leader of the gang, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "So," he growled, pacing in front of them. "You three are the Johnson boys, huh? Your daddy been talking too much, stirring. Up trouble?" Marcus frowned, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about? We're just kids, we don't know anything." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't play dumb with me. I've seen your dad snooping around, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Now we're gonna find out exactly how deep this goes." It dawned on the triplets then. These men weren't after them, they were after their father. Somehow James Johnson had crossed paths with this gang, and now his sons were paying the price. Guilt gnawed at them briefly, but they quickly pushed it aside. There would be time to figure out the why later. Right now they needed to focus on staying alive. As the hours dragged on, the kidnappers took turns taunting them, hurling insults and threats designed to break their spirit. But the triplets refused to crack. They sat quietly, conserving their energy and observing everything. They noticed how the guards grew careless after a while, leaning against the wall or chatting among themselves. They saw the loose board in the corner of the room, partially hidden by a pile of rags, and they caught glimpses of the keys dangling from one man's belt loop, tantalizingly close yet impossibly far. Finally, exhaustion began to set in. The adrenaline that had fueled them earlier started to wane, leaving behind a hollow ache. Yet even in their weakened state, they clung to hope. They thought of their parents, their friends, the life they'd fought so hard to build. Giving up wasn't an option. Not for them, not for anyone who mattered to them. Sometime during the night, Malcolm shifted slightly, testing the tightness of his restraints. To his surprise, they weren't as secure as he'd initially thought. Slowly, carefully, he worked his hands back and forth, ignoring the sting of rope biting into his skin. Beside him, Marcus caught on and subtly adjusted his position to block the guard's view. Michael, meanwhile, kept his gaze fixed on the men, ready to create a diversion if needed. Minutes passed like hours, each movement agonizingly slow. But eventually, Malcolm felt the first strand snap. A surge of triumph coursed through him, followed immediately by caution. He stopped moving, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when it came, a distracted guard turning his back, the others engrossed in conversation, he didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, Malcolm freed himself completely and lunged toward the nearest attacker. Chaos erupted instantly. Marcus tackled another man, using his weight to pin him down, while Michael grabbed a wrench from the workbench and swung it with precision. Within seconds, the balance of power shifted dramatically. What had once seemed like an impossible situation transformed into a fight they were determined to win. By the time the dust settled, all 4 kidnappers lay unconscious, bound with their own ropes. The triplets stood panting, their bodies bruised but their spirits unbroken. They exchanged a glance, a mixture of disbelief and pride flashing in their eyes. They had done it. They had turned the tables on their captors. But their ordeal was far from over. Outside, the woods stretched endlessly, and somewhere beyond them danger still lurked. The basement fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the faint creak of the wooden floorboards above. Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm stood frozen for a moment, their hearts pounding as they absorbed what they had just accomplished. 4 grown men, armed, dangerous, and fueled by hatred, were now incapacitated, tied up with their own restraints. It was a victory, but it wasn't time to celebrate. The triplets knew they were far from safe. Malcolm was the first to move. He quickly scanned the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "They'll have backup. This place is probably crawling with them." Marcus nodded, already thinking ahead. "Agreed, but we can't just run blindly. We need a plan." His mind raced as he assessed their surroundings. "There's got to be something in this room we can use, a weapon, supplies, anything." Michael didn't waste time responding. Instead, he began rummaging through the crates and shelves scattered around the basement. Each box held remnants of the gang's activities, rusted tools, old maps, and even stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. But then, tucked beneath a pile of rags, Michael found something that made his heart leap, a flashlight. Its beam flickered weakly at first, but after a few taps, it came alive, casting a pale glow across the room. "Got light," Michael announced, holding it up triumphantly. The beam illuminated hidden corners of the basement, revealing more than they'd initially noticed. Alongside the clutter, there were signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks leading outside, empty food wrappers, and most alarmingly, blueprints pinned to the wall. Malcolm approached them cautiously, squinting to make out the details. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. "These aren't just plans for this cabin," he muttered, pointing to markings on the map. "They've marked other locations too. Warehouses, abandoned buildings, even neighborhoods. Looks like they've been planning something big." Marcus stepped closer, studying the blueprint intently. "If we can take this with us, it could help bring these guys down for good. But we don't have much time. Let's grab it and go." Working together, the brothers carefully removed the map and rolled it up tightly. Malcolm stuffed it into the waistband of his jeans while Marcus grabbed a crowbar leaning against the wall. They weren't leaving unarmed this time. With the flashlight guiding their way, they crept toward the stairs, listening intently for any sign of movement upstairs. Air grew colder as they ascended, each step creaking under their weight. At the top, they paused, pressing their ears against the door. Faint voices drifted through, muffled but unmistakable. There were at least 2 more men stationed outside the cabin, chatting casually as if nothing was amiss. The triplets exchanged a glance, silently agreeing on their next move. Malcolm took the lead, gripping the flashlight like a club. He cracked the door open just wide enough to peek outside. The scene before him confirmed their suspicions. 2 guards stood near the van, one smoking a cigarette while the other leaned lazily against the hood. Beyond them, dense woods stretched endlessly, offering both cover and uncertainty. Escaping wouldn't be easy, but staying put meant certain capture once reinforcements arrived. "We're outnumbered again," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "But we've got surprise on our side. If we act fast, we can take them down before they know what hit them." Michael cracked his knuckles, a determined glint in his eye. "Let's do this." The plan was simple, yet risky. Malcolm would create a distraction, drawing one guard away from the van. Meanwhile, Marcus and Michael would ambush the second man, using stealth and speed to overpower him. Once both guards were neutralized, they'd sprint into the woods, relying on their training to navigate the terrain and evade pursuit. Taking a deep breath, Malcolm stepped out into the open, shining the flashlight directly into the face of the smoker. "Hey," he shouted, his voice trembling slightly to sell the act. "What are you doing out here?" The man cursed, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, dropping his cigarette and reaching for the gun holstered at his side. Before he could draw it, Malcolm bolted toward the trees, zigzagging erratically to avoid being shot. The guard gave chase, shouting for backup as he disappeared into the darkness. Meanwhile, Marcus and Michael sprang into action. They emerged from behind the cabin, moving swiftly and silently. The second guard barely had time to react before Marcus tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. Michael followed up by disarming him and securing his wrists with zip ties scavenged from the basement. By the time the first guard realized he'd been tricked, it was too late. Malcolm doubled back, circling around to catch him off guard. Using the flashlight as a makeshift weapon, he struck the man hard across the temple, sending him sprawling to the dirt. Within minutes, both guards were subdued, gagged, and left, tied to a tree. Panting heavily, the triplets regrouped near the edge of the forest. The adrenaline coursing through their veins kept exhaustion at bay, for now. But the reality of their situation hit them all at once. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles from home, with no phone, no transportation, and no idea how many more members of the gang might be lurking nearby. "We need to keep moving," Marcus urged, scanning the horizon. "If we stay here, they'll find us." "But where do we go?" Michael asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "We don't even know where we are." Malcolm pulled out the map they'd taken from the basement and spread it on the ground, using the flashlight to illuminate its surface. After a moment of study, he pointed to a cluster of buildings marked several miles north. "That's our best bet," he said firmly. "It looks like an old industrial area. Maybe we can find shelter or a vehicle there." Without hesitation, the brothers set off into the woods, sticking close together as they navigated the uneven terrain. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them flinch, their senses heightened to the point of paranoia. Shadows danced menacingly in the moonlight, and the distant hoot of an owl sounded eerily like a warning. Still, they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the unshakable bond between them. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned, giving way to a desolate stretch of land littered with crumbling structures. The industrial zone was exactly as depicted on the map. Rows of abandoned warehouses, broken windows gaping like hollow eyes. The air smelled of rust and decay, and the silence was oppressive. Yet amidst the desolation, there was hope. Parked near one of the buildings was a dusty pickup truck, its tires flat but otherwise intact. "That's our ticket out of here," Marcus declared, jogging toward it. Michael joined him, inspecting the vehicle eagerly. "Keys are still in the ignition," he reported, grinning despite their dire circumstances. "Think you can hotwire it?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I've seen Dad do it enough times. I can try." While Marcus worked on starting the engine, Malcolm kept watch, pacing nervously as he scanned the perimeter. His instincts screamed that they weren't alone. Sure enough, a faint hum in the distance caught his attention, a sound that grew louder with each passing second. Headlights pierced the darkness, bouncing wildly as multiple vehicles sped toward their location. "They're coming," Malcolm shouted, panic edging into his voice. Hurry up. Marcus fumbled with the wires, sweat dripping down his forehead. Finally, with a sputter and a roar, the engine roared to life. Get in, he yelled, sliding behind the wheel. Michael climbed into the passenger seat while Malcolm jumped into the back, clutching the map tightly. Tires screeched as Marcus slammed the accelerator, sending the truck lurching forward. Behind them, the gang's vehicles closed in rapidly, their headlights forming a menacing convoy. Bullets whizzed past, shattering the rear window and embedding themselves in the truck's battered frame. The brothers ducked instinctively, their hearts hammering in their chests. This thing won't last long, Michael shouted over the chaos. We need another plan. Malcolm unfolded the map again, searching desperately for an escape route. His finger traced a thin line labeled river access. There's a river about 2 miles east, he said urgently. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them. Marcus swerved sharply, veering off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path. The truck bounced violently over rocks and potholes, threatening to overturn at any moment. Despite the danger, the brothers clung to hope. They were fighters, survivors, and they weren't about to give up without a fight. As the river came into view, glittering faintly under the moonlight, the triplets prepared for their final stand. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as brothers, as warriors, and as proof that courage could conquer even the darkest of nights. The river stretched before them, its surface shimmering under the pale glow of the moon. It was wide and unpredictable, with currents that churned fiercely in some spots and slowed to a gentle flow in others. For Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm, it represented both salvation and peril. If they could cross it, they might stand a chance of losing their pursuers. But getting there would require every ounce of skill, strength, and teamwork they possessed. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly as the truck hurtled down the dirt path leading to the riverbank. Behind them, the gang's vehicles roared, closer, their headlights slicing through the darkness like angry eyes. Bullets continued to ricochet off the truck's metal frame, puncturing holes in the doors and shattering what little glass remained. The air inside the cab was thick with tension, each breath heavy with fear and determination. We're almost there, Malcolm shouted from the back seat, clutching the map tightly in one hand while shielding himself from flying debris with the other. His sharp eyes scanned the terrain ahead, searching for any obstacles that might slow them down. Just keep going straight. Michael leaned out the passenger side window, his body braced against the doorframe as he returned fire, with a handgun they'd taken from one of the guards. Though untrained in firearms, his natural athleticism allowed him to steady his aim long enough to force their pursuers to fall back momentarily. Each shot bought them precious seconds, but ammunition was running low. Finally, the truck skidded to a stop at the edge of the riverbank. The brothers spilled out quickly, their movements synchronized despite the chaos surrounding them. Before them lay an old wooden dock, weathered by time and neglect, with a small motorboat tied loosely to a post. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope. Get the boat ready, Marcus barked, already scanning the area for threats. He grabbed the crowbar from the truck bed and positioned himself defensively, prepared to hold off anyone who dared approach. Malcolm sprinted toward the boat, untangling the rope with swift, practiced motions. Meanwhile, Michael hauled supplies from the truck, a flashlight, a half-empty bottle of water, and a first aid kit, stuffing them into a makeshift backpack fashioned from his hoodie. Every item mattered. Survival depended on resourcefulness. As Malcolm started the motor, the distant rumble of engines grew louder. The gang had reached the clearing, their vehicles screeching to a halt mere yards away. Armed men poured out, shouting orders and firing wildly. Sparks flew as bullets struck the ground near the brothers' feet, forcing them to dive for cover behind the truck. They're closing in, Michael yelled, crouching low as he tossed Marcus another weapon scavenged from the kidnappers' stash. We need to move now. Marcus nodded grimly, rising briefly to unleash a barrage of shots aimed at the attackers. His actions weren't meant to kill, but to create enough confusion to give his brothers a fighting chance. Go, he commanded, gesturing toward the boat. I'll cover you. Reluctantly, Malcolm and Michael obeyed, scrambling onto the rickety vessel. Malcolm revved the engine. coaxing the reluctant motor to life just as Marcus leapt aboard, landing hard on the deck. The sudden weight caused the boat to rock violently, but Malcolm steadied it with expert precision, years of training kicking in instinctively. With a deafening roar, the motorboat surged forward, cutting through the water like a knife. Behind them, the gang members scrambled to follow, some diving into smaller boats while others fired blindly in frustration. The river became a battleground, the night air filled with the cacophony of engines, splashing waves, and echoing gunshots. For a few tense moments, it seemed as though escape was within reach. The current carried them swiftly downstream, widening the gap between them and their pursuers. But fate had one more challenge in store. Ahead, the river narrowed dramatically, flanked by jagged rocks and overhanging trees. Visibility was poor, and navigating such treacherous waters required not just skill but luck. "Hold on!" Malcolm shouted, gripping the tiller with white-knuckled intensity. He steered the boat with calculated precision, weaving between obstacles as if performing a deadly dance. Marcus and Michael clung to the sides, their muscles taut with anticipation. A single misstep could send them crashing into the unforgiving rocks below. Suddenly, disaster struck. One of the pursuing boats gained ground, its occupants leaning precariously over the edge to take aim. A bullet zipped past Malcolm's head, narrowly missing him but striking the motor instead. Smoke billowed from the damaged engine, sputtering violently before dying completely. The boat lurched to a halt, leaving them stranded in the middle of the raging river. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but Marcus stepped up, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay calm. We can still make it." He pointed to a cluster of large rocks partially submerged near the shore. "Swim for those, use them as cover." Without hesitation, the brothers slipped into the icy water, the shock of it stealing their breath momentarily. They fought against the current, their limbs burning with exhaustion as they pushed forward. Malcolm reached the rocks first, pulling himself up with trembling arms before turning to help his brothers. Together, they huddled behind the jagged barrier, catching their breath and assessing their options. The gang's boats were closing in again, their laughter carrying across the water like a taunt. Trapped and outnumbered, the triplets knew they couldn't rely on brute force alone. This was where strategy and trust would determine their fate. Malcolm's gaze fell on a fallen tree branch, wedged between two rocks. An idea sparked in his mind. "Marcus," he whispered urgently, nodding toward the branch. "Can you use that?" Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. With Michael providing cover by tossing stones into the water to distract their enemies, Marcus retrieved the branch and used it to fashion a crude lever. Working together, the brothers positioned themselves strategically, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the lead boat drew close enough, Malcolm gave the signal. In one fluid motion, Marcus jammed the lever into the propeller, disabling the engine instantly. The boat veered off course, colliding with another vessel and sending both spinning uncontrollably. Chaos erupted among the gang members as they struggled to regain control, giving the triplets the opening they needed. Seizing the opportunity, the brothers abandoned their hiding spot and swam frantically toward the opposite bank. Their bodies screamed in protest, but adrenaline propelled them forward. As they clawed their way onto dry land, the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, swallowed by the relentless rush of the river. Exhausted and battered, they collapsed onto the muddy shore, gasping for air. For the first time since their ordeal began, they allowed themselves a brief moment of relief. They had survived, one step closer to freedom, one step further from danger. But deep down, they knew the journey was far from over. "What now?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse but resolute. Marcus glanced at the map clutched in Malcolm's hand, tracing their approximate location with a weary finger. "Now," he said firmly, "we find help, and we finish this." The resolve in his voice ignited a spark in all three brothers. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, as a team, as warriors, and as proof that courage could conquer even the darkest of nights. The brothers lay sprawled on the muddy riverbank, their bodies aching and their clothes soaked through. The adrenaline that had kept them going was beginning to wear off, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it felt like weights were tied to their limbs. Yet despite their battered state, they knew they couldn't afford to rest for long. Somewhere in the distance, shouts echoed faintly. The gang hadn't given up the chase. Every second counted. Marcus sat up first, wincing as he wiped mud from his face. His sharp eyes scanned the dark forest surrounding them, searching for any sign of immediate danger. "We need to move," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "They'll regroup soon, and when they do, we don't want to be sitting ducks." Michael groaned as he pushed himself upright, clutching his side where a bruise was already forming. "Where are we even supposed to go?" he asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "We're stuck in the middle of nowhere with no clue. What's ahead?" Malcolm unfolded the map again, using the dim light of the flashlight to study it carefully. His fingers traced lines and symbols until he found something promising. A small town marked about 5 miles northeast. "There's a town here," he announced, pointing to the spot. "It might have people who can help us call the police or find a way back home." 5 miles, Michael muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "That's easier said than done, especially in this condition." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "We've made it this far, haven't we? 5 more miles won't stop us now." His confidence, though forced, was enough to rally the others. They exchanged determined glances, silently agreeing to push forward no matter how daunting the task seemed. With renewed resolve, the triplets set off into the dense woods, sticking close together as they navigated the uneven terrain. Branches clawed at their skin, and roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip them at every step. The air was thick with humidity, making each breath feel heavier than the last. Still, they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the unbreakable bond between them. As they walked, Malcolm kept one eye on the map and the other on their surroundings. He noticed subtle signs of civilization: broken beer bottles half buried in the dirt, tire tracks leading deeper into the forest, and even a rusted fence post leaning precariously against a tree. These clues gave him hope that they were heading in the right direction. After nearly an hour of trudging through the wilderness, they stumbled upon an old dirt road winding its way through the trees. It was overgrown and barely visible, but it offered a clearer path than the tangled underbrush they'd been battling. Marcus suggested they follow it, reasoning that roads usually led somewhere. Whether to safety or further trouble remained to be seen. The change in terrain provided some relief, allowing them to pick up the pace slightly. But just as they began to feel a glimmer of optimism, disaster struck. A sudden rustling in the bushes ahead froze them in their tracks. Before they could react, 2 figures emerged from the shadows, men dressed in camouflage gear, their faces obscured by bandanas. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder, while the other held a machete. "Well, well," the man with the rifle drawled, stepping closer. "Looks like we caught ourselves some strays." Marcus instinctively stepped in front of his brothers, shielding them with his body. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The men exchanged smirks, clearly amused by his bravado. "Friends of yours are looking for you," the second man said, twirling the machete lazily. "Said there's a reward for bringing you back alive." The realization hit the triplets like a punch to the gut. These weren't random strangers. They were part of the gang. Somehow the kidnappers had anticipated their escape route and stationed scouts along the way. Now, cornered and outnumbered once again, the brothers faced yet another fight for survival. Malcolm's mind raced as he assessed the situation. 2 armed men versus 3 unarmed teenagers. It wasn't ideal, but they'd overcome worse odds before. "Distract them," he whispered urgently to his brothers. "On my signal." Without waiting for confirmation, Marcus lunged forward, feigning aggression. "You think you can take us down? Come on then," he shouted, drawing the attention of both men. The distraction worked. As the armed men focused on Marcus, Malcolm darted around them, grabbing a fallen branch from the side of the road. With precision honed by years of training, he swung it hard, striking the rifleman squarely in the back of the knees. The man cried out, dropping his weapon as he crumpled to the ground. Michael seized the opportunity, tackling the second man with all his strength. The impact sent the machete flying, skittering harmlessly into the bushes. The two grappled fiercely, rolling in the dirt as punches flew. Though smaller in stature, Michael's agility and determination gave him the upper hand. Within moments, he managed to pin the man down, rendering him immobile. Meanwhile, Marcus delivered a swift kick to the rifleman's ribs, ensuring he wouldn't get back up anytime soon. Breathing heavily, the brothers stood victorious once again, but their triumph was short-lived. The commotion had drawn unwanted attention. Voices shouted in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "They're coming," Malcolm warned, urgency lacing his voice. "We need to disappear now." Thinking quickly, Marcus spotted a narrow trail branching off the main road, disappearing into thicker foliage. "This way," he urged, leading the charge. The brothers sprinted down the path, weaving between trees and leaping over obstacles with practiced ease. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder, spurring them to push harder. Their stamina was fading fast, but desperation fueled their movements. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they burst into a clearing and froze. Before them stood an old cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. It looked abandoned, but appearances could be deceiving. "Should we risk it?" Michael panted, glancing nervously at the approaching voices. Malcolm hesitated, weighing their options. Staying outside meant certain capture. Entering the cabin was a gamble, but one they had to take. Inside, he decided, pushing open the door cautiously. The interior was musty and cluttered, filled with dusty furniture and cobwebs. A quick search revealed no signs of recent occupation, giving them a sliver of hope. Working quickly, the brothers barricaded the door with whatever they could find: a rickety table, an overturned chair, and even a rusted metal toolbox. Hiding wasn't enough, though. If the gang searched thoroughly, they'd find them eventually. That's when Marcus spotted a trapdoor hidden beneath a tattered rug. "Down here," he whispered, pulling it open to reveal a set of crumbling stairs leading into darkness. One by one, they descended into the underground space, closing the trapdoor quietly behind them. The air was damp and cold, but they didn't care. For now they were safe, or as safe as they could be. Above them, footsteps thundered across the floorboards, accompanied by angry shouts. The gang members tore through the cabin, overturning furniture and smashing windows in their search. The brothers held their breath, hearts pounding as they listened to the chaos above. Minutes stretched into eternity, but eventually the noise subsided. Silence returned, broken only by the distant hum of insects and the occasional creak of settling wood. Slowly, cautiously, the triplets emerged from their hiding place, blinking in the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. "We can't stay here," Marcus said quietly, his gaze fixed on the boarded-up window. "But we're close to the town. If we keep moving, we might make it before sunrise." Fatigue weighed heavily on them, but they nodded in agreement. Together, they stepped back into the night, determined to see their ordeal through to the end. Each step brought them closer to freedom, and justice for everything they'd endured. The final leg of their journey was the hardest yet. Exhaustion clawed at Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm with every step they took, but they refused to give in. The forest around them seemed endless, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that pressed down on their already frayed nerves. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent their hearts racing, each sound a potential threat. Yet despite the fear gnawing at them, they pushed forward, driven by one singular goal: survival. As dawn began to break, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink, the brothers finally stumbled upon the outskirts of the small town, marked on their map. It was quieter than they had imagined, a cluster of weathered buildings, a gas station with flickering neon lights, and a diner where a few early risers sat sipping coffee. To anyone else it might have looked unremarkable, but to the triplets it was salvation. "Over there," Malcolm whispered hoarsely, pointing toward the gas station. "We can use the payphone." The trio staggered across the empty street, their mud-caked clothes and weary expressions drawing curious glances from passers-by. Ignoring the stares, they made their way to the phone booth tucked beside the pumps. Marcus fumbled in his pocket for loose change, his hands trembling as he inserted coins into the slot. With shaking fingers, he dialed 911. "This is an emergency," Marcus said urgently when the operator answered. "My brothers and I were kidnapped by a gang. We managed to escape, but they're still after us. Please, we need help." The operator's calm voice reassured him as she gathered details about their location and situation. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air, growing louder as police cars sped toward them. Relief washed over the brothers like a tidal wave. They weren't alone anymore. Officers swarmed the area, questioning the boys while paramedics tended to their injuries. Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm recounted their harrowing ordeal, leaving out only the parts about their father's secret training. They knew revealing that would raise too many questions they weren't ready to answer. Instead, they framed their survival as sheer luck and quick thinking, which wasn't entirely untrue. While the authorities worked to secure the town and launch a manhunt for the gang, the triplets were taken to the local hospital for evaluation. Their parents, Lisa and James Johnson, were contacted immediately. By mid-morning they arrived, tears streaming down Lisa's face as she embraced her sons tightly. James stood back for a moment, his stoic demeanor cracking as emotion overwhelmed him. He hugged each of his boys fiercely, pride and relief shining in his eyes. "You did good," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Back home days later, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible. The media frenzy surrounding their story had died down, though the triplets remained local heroes in the eyes of many. But fame wasn't what mattered to them. What stayed etched in their minds was the horror they'd faced and the realization that racism and hatred could manifest in ways far more sinister than they'd ever imagined. Their brush with danger also brought clarity, the evidence they'd uncovered during their escape, the blueprints and maps detailing illegal operations, had been handed over to federal agents. It turned out the gang wasn't just a group of racists. They were involved in human trafficking, smuggling, and other criminal activities. The information provided by the triplets led to multiple arrests and dismantled a network that had preyed on vulnerable communities for years. Inspired by their experience, Marcus, Michael, and Malcolm decided to channel their trauma into something positive. Together, they founded a nonprofit organization aimed at teaching self-defense and leadership skills to marginalized youth. Drawing on lessons learned from their father's training, they created programs designed to empower young people to protect themselves not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. Their efforts gained traction quickly, earning support from community leaders and activists alike. Workshops were held in schools, community centers, and even parks, reaching hundreds of kids who reminded them of their younger selves. Through these initiatives, the brothers hoped to instill confidence, resilience, and unity in the next generation, to show them that no matter how dark things got, they had the power to fight back. Years passed, and the legend of the Johnson triplets grew. Their story became a symbol of courage and defiance, proof that ordinary individuals could rise above extraordinary circumstances. People often asked how they'd managed to survive such a nightmare, and their answer was always the same: teamwork. "We didn't do it alone," Marcus would say during interviews, gesturing to his brothers. "It was all of us working together. That's what got us through." Michael chimed in, grinning despite the weight of the memories. "And yeah, maybe we had a little help from Dad's boot camp," he joked, earning laughter from the crowd. Malcolm, ever the quiet observer, added softly, "But the real lesson is this: hate doesn't win unless you let it. We chose to stand up, to fight back, and to turn our pain into purpose. And that's something anyone can do." Their message resonated deeply, inspiring countless others to confront their own struggles head-on. Those scars, both visible and invisible, remained. The triplets wore them as badges of honor. They had faced evil and emerged stronger, not because they were invincible, but because they believed in each other and in the power of unity. In time, the nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of a better future. Marcus pursued a career in law enforcement, determined to root out injustice wherever he found it. Michael became a coach and mentor, using sports as a tool to build character and confidence in young athletes. Malcolm dedicated himself to advocacy work, speaking out against racism and systemic inequality. Through it all, the bond between the brothers only grew stronger. They remained inseparable, their shared experiences forging a connection that nothing could break. And though they never sought recognition, their actions spoke volumes, proving that true heroes aren't defined by capes or titles, but by the choices they make when faced with adversity. One evening, years after their ordeal, the triplets stood side by side on the basketball court where it had all begun. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement. Children laughed and played nearby, oblivious to the dangers lurking in the world beyond. For a moment, the brothers simply watched, content in the knowledge that they had done everything they could to make that world a little safer. "Remember when we thought this place was just a court?" Michael mused, dribbling the ball absent-mindedly. Marcus chuckled, leaning against the chain-link fence. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Malcolm smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Maybe it was, but look how far we've come." And, as the first stars appeared in the night sky, the Johnson triplets stood tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together,